Finally, the Dark King had enough. He decided to set a trap. One morning, instead of going to his lover's grave, he hid in a tall position overlooking the palace, waiting to see who was bold enough to defy him, bold enough to enter his palace or his kingdom when he had made it clear to everyone that no one was welcomed there. He didn't have to wait long. A man dressed in blue hurried into the palace, carrying something in his hands and looking over his shoulder as if he feared being caught. The Dark King's eyes widened in shock when he recognized him. It was Jafari, the annoyingly handsome Kenyan prince he had ordered to leave. The man he had threatened was the one leaving these cursed offerings. Prince Jafari watched King Adebayo and Kwame ride off, feeling a weight in his chest. His time in Nigeria had been joyful, especially with Adebayo, but now that his friend had found true love with Kwame, Jafari felt like he no longer belonged. He wanted to follow them, but feared being a third wheel in their happiness. It was enough for him to know he had played a part in bringing them back together, making amends for the pain he had caused. Returning to Kenya wasn't an option either. He had always been the black sheep of his family, overshadowed by his older brother, the golden child, destined to be king. Jafari's parents had tolerated Jafari until they discovered his secret. He was gay. Since then, their tolerance had turned to disgust, leaving Jafari feeling unwanted in his own home. He joked and caused trouble to mask his loneliness, but deep inside, he was drowning in pain. All his life, Prince Jafari had hidden his true self, yearning for love and acceptance that always seemed just out of reach. King Adebayo had been his first love, the boy who unknowingly broke his heart by not reciprocating his feelings back when they were teenagers. Jafari had tried to push those feelings aside over the years, but hearing about King Adebayo's open declaration of love for another man had reignited old wounds. Yet, as Jafari saw how deeply King Adebayo loved Kwame, he knew he had to move on. He was genuinely happy for them, even if it left him feeling more alone than ever. And just when Jafari thought that loneliness would be his only companion for life, fate intervened. The arrival of the Dark King was like a jolt to his stagnant existence, a sudden, unexpected stir. The Dark King's sadness had called out to Jafari the moment he saw him. It was like looking into a mirror, seeing his own loneliness reflected back at him. Despite the Dark King's cold demeanor, Jafari couldn't bring himself to leave Sudan. He felt an inexplicable pull towards the man, a sense of shared pain that made him want to stay, even though he wasn't wanted. Everywhere he went, Jafari felt like there was no place for him, but in the Dark King's palace, he felt he had found a kindred spirit, a man who, like him, was lost in his own loneliness. Turning away from the departing figures of King Adebayo, Lumusi, and Kwame, Jafari found himself alone, lost in thought. The courtyard of the Dark King's palace was eerily silent, the blackened stone walls absorbing all light and sound. He was so deep in his own sorrow that he didn't notice the tall, imposing figure of the Dark King standing in front of him until he bumped into him. Jafari jumped, his heart racing. He had thought he was alone. The Dark King's face remained emotionless, as cold and unreadable as ever. "What are you still doing here?" The Dark King's voice was low, almost a growl. "Why did you not leave with your friends?" I thought I could stay here at the palace for a little while," Jafari stammered, trying to steady his voice. The Dark King's eyes narrowed and his tone turned icy. "You've overstayed your welcome. Leave immediately. If I see you again, you'll join the skeletons on the streets. And believe me, I'm not jesting." A shiver ran down Jafari's spine. How could the Dark King be so impossibly alluring, yet menacing at the same time? It left Jafari confused. He had anticipated rejection, but the sting of the Dark King's harsh words still cut deep. Without another word, he turned and left the palace, the weight of his unwelcome presence bearing down on him. What was he even doing here? Maybe he should just return to Kenya. What did he truly hope to gain from a man as cold as ice? Jafari returned to the school for princes and princesses, the closest place to the Dark King's kingdom that he knew. Nestled in the mountains on the outskirts of the Dark King's realm, it was the only place in the territory that had escaped the Dark King's destruction. Jafari hadn't lived there in years, but the familiar stone buildings stirred memories of simpler times. As he approached, his old mentor's eyes lit up in surprise at the sight of him. "You didn't leave with Adebayo?" the old man asked. "The plan was to leave with him, but I realized how much I missed this place." Jafari lied once again. The mentor studied him for a moment, his gaze sharp and knowing. "Missed the place, eh? I distinctively remember you declaring on the day you graduated that you never wanted to see this place again. What's really going on?" Jafari shrugged, avoiding the question. "Just needed a change of scenery, and maybe a place to lie low for a while." The mentor didn't press further, sensing Jafari wasn't ready to open up. Instead, he clapped him on the shoulder. "Well, if you're going to stay here, you'll have to earn your keep. You've always been a crack shot with a bow. How about teaching the young ones some archery?" Jafari hesitated. "I'm not exactly the teaching type, old man." "Nonsense." The mentor waved off his concerns. "You're more than capable. Besides, those kids could use someone who's been out in the world, seen a thing or two. You might even find you enjoy it." With a reluctant nod, Jafari agreed, though doubt gnawed at him. He couldn't imagine ever enjoying the role of a teacher. Teenagers grated on his nerves, their endless tantrums and overwhelming emotions, testing his already thin patience. He had no tolerance for the chaos that swirled in their self-absorbed minds, and the thought of dealing with it daily filled him with dread. Far from the school, a few weeks later, in the heart of the ruined kingdom, the Dark King awoke in his cold, empty bed. The silence of the palace was suffocating, pressing down on him like a physical weight. Every morning was the same. He would wake, feeling the emptiness inside him grow, a void that could never be filled. He dressed in his usual black attire, the fabric as dark as the endless night that seemed to envelop his soul. Without a word to anyone, though there was no one left to speak to, he made his way to the small, secluded grave outside the palace walls. The grave was unmarked, save for a single black stone at its head. The Dark King knelt beside it, his hands trembling as he reached out to touch the cold, unforgiving surface. His heart ached with a pain so deep it was almost unbearable. Every morning, he came here to weep. The tears flowed freely as he remembered his lover's face, the warmth of his smile, the sound of his laughter, but those memories were tainted by the horror of what had happened, the screams, the agony. His lover had died in such pain, and it was all his fault. He had been powerless to save him, and the guilt gnawed at him every day. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry. I couldn't save you. I failed you." He stayed there for what felt like hours, lost in his grief. The only thing that brought him back to the present was the gnawing hunger for vengeance that had driven him to destroy his own kingdom. But even that had not brought him peace. It had only deepened the abyss inside him. As the Dark King made his way back to the palace, something caught his eye. In the blackened garden outside his bedroom window, a splash of color stood out against the charred ground. He frowned and approached the spot, his heart quickening with anger. Someone had left several pots of red roses in the garden, their vibrant petals a stark contrast to the surrounding desolation. The sight of color, so vibrant, so alive, infuriated him. He hated it. Color reminded him of everything he had lost, of the lives he had destroyed in his rage, of the world that once thrived before he turned it to ruin. With a growl, he smashed the pots, sending shards of clay and petals flying. The roses lay scattered, crushed beneath his boots. But the next morning, fresh from a sleepless night, he found more roses. This time they covered the entire garden, as if someone had delivered an entire carriage full of them just to mock him. His fury blazed hotter than ever. He tore through the garden, destroying every last flower. But it didn't end there. Every day for a week, more roses appeared, not just in the garden, but everywhere in his palace, his bedroom, the throne room, even the halls. It was as if an unseen intruder was taunting him, daring him to react. Then one morning he returned to find baskets of apples instead, their red skins gleaming in the dim light. He threw them away in a rage, but more appeared the next day. Someone had even replaced the black curtains in his chambers with bright, colorful ones, blues, greens, and yellows. The sight was ridiculous, infuriating. The Dark King nearly lost his mind. He tore down the curtains, smashed the apples, and crushed the roses. But the more he destroyed, the more appeared. It was as if someone was determined to force him to confront the colors he had banished, to drag life back into his cold, dead world. Finally, the Dark King had enough. He decided to set a trap. One morning, instead of going to his lover's grave, he hid in a tall position overlooking the palace, waiting to see who was bold enough to defy him, bold enough to enter his palace or his kingdom when he had made it clear to everyone that no one was welcomed there. He didn't have to wait long. A man dressed in blue hurried into the palace, carrying something in his hands and looking over his shoulder as if he feared being caught. The Dark King's eyes widened in shock when he recognized him. It was Jafari, the annoyingly handsome Kenyan prince he had ordered to leave. The man he had threatened was the one leaving these cursed offerings. The Dark King descended upon Jafari like a storm, his presence dark and terrifying. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, his voice cold and menacing. "I told you to leave. Why are you still here?" Jafari turned to face him, unafraid despite the fury in the Dark King's eyes. "I only wanted to bring some life back to this place. Seriously, how do you live like this?" "I didn't ask for your help," the Dark King snapped. "I don't need your pity. You're meddling in things you don't understand." Jafari's eyes flashed with anger. "Maybe I don't understand, but that doesn't mean I'm going to stand by and do nothing. You're not the first person to lose someone, okay? We're all grieving in one way or another, but that doesn't mean we have to let it consume us." The words struck deep, fueling the Dark King's rage to a dangerous level. In a voice as cold and unyielding as steel, he ordered Jafari to leave, his hand twitching towards his sword, ready to strike if Jafari dared speak again. How dare he? Jafari knew nothing. "Fine," Jafari muttered, dropping the basket he'd brought before storming away. But in his haste, he took a wrong turn and stumbled into a hidden ditch, injuring his leg. The Dark King, who had been watching him leave, called out too late as he saw Jafari nearing the ditch. His anger evaporated, replaced by sudden concern, and he ran to Jafari's side. Seeing the severity of the injury, he carefully helped Jafari out of the ditch and carried him back inside the palace. His rage completely melted away now. For the next few days, Jafari was confined to the palace as his leg healed, unable to walk without help. The Dark King tended to him, but their interactions were frosty at best. The king's touch was gentle, yet his words were curt, maintaining a careful distance. Jafari, unused to such coldness from someone who was helping him, matched the Dark King's demeanor, staying silent and keeping his thoughts to himself. The days were long and filled with a tense silence, punctuated only by the occasional, necessary exchange of words. But as time passed, Jafari's natural warmth began to chip away at the icy wall between them. He started talking, first about small things, then more. At first, the Dark King responded with monosyllables, if he responded at all. But Jafari was relentless, refusing to be shut down. One evening, as the Dark King was wrapping Jafari's injury, Jafari couldn't help but share something that had been on his mind. "You know," he began, breaking the usual silence, "I never thought I'd enjoy teaching, but it's become something else, something more." The Dark King glanced at him, his expression still guarded but curious. Jafari continued, unable to hide the pride in his voice. "Those kids, they're amazing. They're so eager to learn, so full of potential. I used to wander through life, never really knowing what I was meant to do. But now, I feel like I've found my purpose. I'm helping shape their futures, guiding them to be better than they thought they could be." He smiled, lost in the memory of his students. "There's an archery tournament coming up that I organized. I thought it would be great to have top archers from across the continent compete for a prize, so I'm training a team of my students to participate. It's a major event at the school, and parents, royalty from all over Africa will be coming to watch. It's the first time I've taken on something like this, and I'm really proud of it." The Dark King remained silent, but his demeanor softened slightly. Jafari's enthusiasm was infectious, and though the king didn't respond, he listened intently as Jafari continued to speak of his students and the tournament. The stories were endless, filled with details about the children's progress, their triumphs, and the joy Jafari found in teaching them. As the days went by, the Dark King found it harder to maintain his cold exterior. Jafari's non-stop chatter wore him down, and against his better judgment, he started to respond, first with simple comments, then with questions. Their conversations grew longer, more detailed, as they slowly began to share pieces of themselves with each other. One night, after Jafari had fallen asleep, the Dark King sat by his side, lost in thought. Jafari's stories of his students, of finding purpose, had stirred something in him, a longing, a deep-seated pain that he had buried long ago. The next morning, as they shared breakfast, the Dark King found himself speaking without thinking. "His name was Malik," he said quietly, almost as if to himself. Jafari looked up, surprised by the sudden admission. "He was everything to me, but I failed him." The Dark King's voice was thick with emotion, and Jafari listened in silence as he continued. "My father was a powerful leader, as you know. He ruled over this land with an iron fist, and I was his heir, the one he put all his pride and expectations into. But then I met Malik. He was a simple farmer's boy, but he had a heart as vast as the ocean. I fell in love with him, but my father, he saw it as the ultimate betrayal." The Dark King's eyes grew distant, his voice low and filled with anguish. "My father was furious when he found out. He saw my love for Malik as a weakness, a stain on the legacy he had built. One night, he gathered his men and went to Malik's home. He dragged me along, forcing me to watch as he set the house on fire, with Malik and his family inside." Jafari gasped, horrified. The Dark King's hands trembled as he continued, his voice breaking. "I tried to save them, tried to rush into the flames, but my father's men held me back. I could hear them screaming, 'Malik, his family.' I heard them all as they burned, and my father made me stand there, made me watch." Tears welled up in the Dark King's eyes, and he looked away, unable to meet Jafari's gaze. "That night, something inside me broke. The boy I was died with Malik. In my rage, I burned down my father's palace with him inside as payback. I destroyed everything he had built, everything he had cared for. But it didn't stop the pain. It only made it worse. So I burned the kingdom too, wanting everyone to suffer as I had suffered." He fell silent, the weight of his confession hanging heavily in the air. Jafari's heart ached for him, for the unimaginable loss and the depth of his pain. Without thinking, he reached out and took the Dark King's hand in his own. He knew he should be horrified or repelled by the Dark King's admission of such horrific acts, but he wasn't. Instead, he felt a deep sense of compassion for the man. "You didn't fail him," Jafari said softly. "Your father was the one who failed you, who failed to see the love you had for Malik. You've been carrying this burden for so long, but you don't have to do it alone." The Dark King looked at him, his eyes filled with a mix of pain and gratitude, and then, in a moment of impulsive tenderness, Jafari leaned in and kissed him. The kiss was soft, hesitant at first, but it quickly deepened as the Dark King responded, his need for comfort and connection overwhelming his defenses. That night, they made love with a tenderness that transcended passion, a slow, deliberate merging of souls that was as much about healing as it was about desire. In the warmth of Jafari's embrace, the Dark King let go of years of pain, allowing himself to be vulnerable for the first time in an eternity. Their bodies moved in a rhythm of shared understanding, each touch and kiss a silent promise of solace. It was a union born not just of physical need, but of a deep, unspoken longing to heal the wounds that had scarred them both, creating a moment of pure, unfiltered connection. But the next morning, when Jafari woke, the warmth of the night before had vanished. The Dark King was distant again, cold and indifferent as he dressed and prepared for the day. The tenderness of the previous night seemed like a distant dream, and it left Jafari confused and hurt. "Are we not going to talk about what happened?" Jafari asked, his voice filled with concern. The Dark King didn't respond, his gaze focused on something far away. He ignored Jafari's attempts to reach out to him, his walls firmly back in place. Frustration and hurt boiled inside Jafari. "Last night meant something to me," he said, his voice rising with emotion. "I thought we had connected, but now you're acting like it didn't matter." Finally, the Dark King looked at him, his eyes cold and distant. "I'm sorry, Jafari," he said, his voice hollow, "but there is no room in my heart for anyone. There's no hope for us. I'm beyond redemption, beyond saving. After everything I've done, I'm nothing but a dead thing. Don't waste your time on me." Jafari's heart shattered at the words. Tears welled in his eyes as he searched the Dark King's face for any trace of the man he had held so tenderly the night before. "But I love you," he confessed, his voice breaking with the weight of his emotions. "I've fallen in love with you, and it's tearing me apart to see you like this." The Dark King's expression didn't change. He looked away, his silence a cruel answer to Jafari's heartfelt confession. The rejection was like a knife to Jafari's heart, and he felt as though he couldn't breathe. Unable to bear it any longer, Jafari got up and left, his heart heavy with sorrow and anger. He had shared something beautiful with the Dark King, something real, but now it felt as if it had all been for nothing. Jafari returned to the school, but his usual cheer was nowhere to be found. His heart was heavy, the weight of his recent heartbreak pulling him down with a force that felt unbearable. Everyone noticed the change in him. The mischievous glint in his eyes had dulled, and the smile that once never left his face had faded. His colleagues and students whispered among themselves, worried about the man who had become the life of the school in such a short time. King Adebayo had once broken Jafari's heart when he didn't return his love, but that pain paled in comparison to what he felt now. The hurt the Dark King had inflicted on him was deeper, sharper. It cut through him in a way he hadn't thought possible. It hurt so much he felt he could barely breathe. No one had ever hurt him like this, and the worst part was, even though his heart was shattered, It stubbornly refused to stop loving the Dark King. Jafari had fallen for him fast and hard, and the pain of his unrequited love was suffocating. One afternoon, his mentor approached him as he sat alone in the courtyard, lost in thought. "You've been quiet lately," the mentor said, sitting beside him. "That's not like you." Jafari sighed, his heart heavy with sorrow. "I've never felt like this before," he confessed, his voice trembling. "I've been hurt before, but this is different. I fell in love with the Dark King. I didn't mean to, but I did. And now he doesn't want me. He said there's no hope for us, that he has no room in his heart for anyone else." The mentor listened quietly, shocked by Jafari's admission, yet his gaze remained soft and understanding. Now it made sense why Jafari had chosen to stay in Sudan. He hadn't anticipated a connection between Jafari and the Dark King, but it was a welcomed development. "Love is a powerful thing, Jafari," he said gently. "It can lift you to great heights, but it can also tear you apart. Still, you mustn't lose hope. Love often surprises us when we least expect it." Jafari shook his head, tears welling up in his eyes. "I want to believe that, but I don't know if I can. He was so cold, so distant. After everything we shared, he just shut me out." The mentor placed a comforting hand on Jafari's shoulder. "Don't give up on love. The Dark King may have his reasons, his fears, but that doesn't mean it's the end. Love can heal even the deepest wounds." Jafari wiped his eyes, trying to steady his emotions. "I wish I could believe that," he said softly, "but right now it just hurts too much." The mentor nodded, understanding the depth of his pain. "I won't push you, but I want you to know that you have a place here. We'd love to offer you a permanent position at the school. You've done amazing work, and you're a natural with the students. Everyone love you." Jafari's heart ached at the offer. He wanted to accept it, to build a life in Sudan, but the thought of being so close to the Dark King, yet not with him, was too painful to bear. "I don't know if I can stay," he admitted. "I thought there might be something between us, but now I'm not sure I can stay so close to him and not be with him." The mentor gave him a sad smile. "Take your time, Jafari. You don't have to decide right now. Just know that we're here for you, whatever you choose." As the day of the archery tournament arrived, the school was abuzz with excitement. Royalty from all over Africa had gathered to watch the event. The parents of the princes and princesses who attended the school and other archery fans. It was a day of great importance, and despite his heartbreak, Jafari felt a swell of pride at what he had accomplished. Preparing for the tournament had been the only thing keeping him distracted from his sorrow. He had poured his heart into it, determined to give it his best, even though he wasn't sure if he would stay in Sudan after this. As the tournament began, Jafari couldn't help but wish that his family could be there to see what he had achieved. But more than that, he found himself wishing that the Dark King would come. He knew it was pathetic, but he wanted the man he loved to be proud of him. He also knew it was foolish hope. The Dark King never attended social events. Everyone knew that. He was a figure of fear and mystery, known to appear only to cause chaos or take a life. No one had seen him in public since the day he burned down his kingdom, but still, Jafari wished. As the competition got underway, a murmur spread through the crowd. Heads turned and whispers filled the air. Jafari's heart skipped a beat as he followed their gaze to the entrance. There, standing tall and imposing, was the Dark King. He had come. Jafari could hardly believe his eyes. His heart swelled with joy, overpowering the sorrow that had weighed him down for so long. He didn't care about the murmurs or the fearful looks from the crowd. He didn't care about the Dark King's fearsome reputation or the terrible things he had done in the past. All he knew was that the man he loved had come, and that was enough. The Dark King made his way to Jafari and sat beside him, the two of them watching the tournament together. Around them, people whispered in astonishment, wondering how Jafari had managed to draw the Dark King out of his scorched kingdom. They speculated about their relationship, the questions endless, but no one dared to ask them directly. As the tournament concluded, with Jafari's team emerging victorious, the two of them found a quiet moment together beneath a large tree, the setting sun casting a warm golden light over them. The air was thick with unspoken emotions, and Jafari turned to the Dark King, his heart pounding in his chest. "I'm so happy you came," Jafari said, his voice trembling with hope. Does this mean you want to be with me?" The Dark King looked at Jafari, his eyes filled with a depth of emotion that he had tried to bury for so long. "I've thought of nothing but you since you left," he admitted, his voice low and full of longing. "I didn't realize how deeply I had fallen for you. You brought light back into my life, Jafari. You reminded me of what it feels like to love. Instead of mourning at my lover's grave, I found myself wanting to be with you, to hold you. I've fallen in love with you. But—" Jafari's heart soared at his words, but the Dark King's hesitation sent a pang of fear through him. "But?" Jafari asked, his voice barely a whisper. The Dark King looked away, his expression torn. "I don't know if you should be with a man like me. I've done terrible things, Jafari. People hate me, curse me for what I've done. You would inherit that hatred just by being with me. I'm beyond redemption. I don't want you to waste your love on someone as damaged as I am." Jafari's heart broke at the pain in the Dark King's voice, but his love was unwavering. "I don't care about your past," he said, his voice strong with conviction. "I only care about the man you are now and the man you want to become. We can move forward together. We can rebuild your kingdom, and I'll stand by you every step of the way." The Dark King looked at him, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "You're willing to do that? To stand by me, despite everything?" Jafari nodded, his heart full of love and determination. "Yes, I love you. I'm willing to face whatever comes as long as we're together." The Dark King was deeply moved by Jafari's words. He stepped forward, hesitating only for a moment before closing the distance between them. Then he kissed Jafari deeply, pouring all the emotion he had kept buried for so long into that kiss. Jafari responded with equal fervor, and they held each other, the kiss stretching on, a silent promise that neither of them would face their future alone. When they finally pulled apart, their foreheads resting together, the Dark King's breath was ragged, his heart pounding with a mixture of relief and fear. "I'm not sure where to start," he admitted, his voice tinged with vulnerability. "I don't even know how to begin making amends." Jafari gently pulled back, meeting his gaze with a reassuring smile. "Not all of your people died," he said softly, watching as the Dark King's eyes widened in surprise. "Many fled to the forest that day, and they've been living there ever since. I met them through my mentor." The Dark King's breath hitched, his eyes searching Jafari's face for any sign of false hope. When he found none, a wave of relief washed over him, followed by a surge of eager determination. But with that came a flicker of fear. Fear that those who had survived might not accept him, might reject any attempt at redemption after the pain he had caused. I didn't know," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank the gods, they're alive, but will they even let me near them after what I've done?" Jafari squeezed his hand, his touch grounding and steady. "It won't be easy, but it's a start. You can begin by going to them, by apologizing and earning their trust back. I'll be with you every step of the way." The Dark King nodded, a mixture of hope, fear, and resolve settling in his chest. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice barely holding back the flood of emotions. "Thank you for giving me a chance at redemption." Together they made a promise to rebuild the kingdom, to stand by each other through whatever challenges lay ahead. It wouldn't be easy, but with Jafari by his side, the Dark King felt a flicker of hope, a hope he hadn't felt in a very long time. And so, hand in hand, they looked toward the future, ready to face it together, determined to rebuild not just a kingdom, but their lives, their love, and their happiness.